Sonic Truth returns. Sometimes Dynasty-focused fantasy football podcast. Alan Seslowsky of RotoWire.com, along with Theo, Gremminger, and the Podfather. Guys, I've been in a ton of drafts, both Dynasty startups. I'm doing a lot of best ball and redraft as well. And we have exhausted our player takes. And, there's still a lot of player takes to come as training camp and news unfolds. But I think today, talking about how to draft strategy is meaningful because there are more and more strategies developing. I could think of at least 10 or 12. So I'll start with Theo, man. What do you think, the best strategy for drafting in 2024?
Picking the correct players is the best draft strategy in 2024.
It all comes back to players.
That's what it all comes down to. Like, we could go through, and I'm sure we can make a bull case for hero, a bull case for zero. Robust RB is back in play this year. I can start my draft with Bijan Robinson and Devon Achane in every single draft. But when it comes down to it, it's about selecting the correct players. And I think that's the great thing about us is we're going to present the bull case for each draft plan, and we're going to present like sort of the risks. But I don't think it's you have to draft this way to win. There's multiple ways to draft and win, especially this year.
Matt, I know that you've been a fan of hero and zero running back, and we'll get into the details of those and describe them for everybody. But you've been doing drafts. You have your finger on the pulse of the market. What do you think is the best draft strategy for 2024 before we get nailed down into this a little bit?
Well, it's not Devon Achane in the second round. I can tell you that right now.
Third round. You get him in the third round now, Matt. It's a cheat code.
It's not. It's a cheat code to go Achane in the third round of a dynasty draft where you have him for his career. 190-pound guy. And they just drafted a guy that is basically a bigger version of him. So I don't like drafting a non-bell cow profile, especially if the team just drafted a guy that can do a lot of similar things, right? A lot of redundancies there between Jalen Wright and Devon Achane, and all the fragility we've seen with this stretch zone running scheme, especially with players that are, slashers. So I would not draft Achane there in terms of my strategy. If I'm not getting Bijan or Breece Hall in the first round, I'm going zero RB. That's just what I'm doing. And in superflex, sometimes you can wait and get a Breece Hall at the very least at the turn, right? In superflex, there's certainly some quarterback heavy drafting that can happen. And then that's interesting to go quarterback, running back right there. That's a fun strategy. But I could green light taking a running back in the first round when I haven't been able to do that in the last couple of years, right? In Superflex, I've been going to say quarterback always in the first round. Now this year, there's enough good quarterbacks that are going to be there, enough elite quarterbacks are going to be there in the second round that you can get away with a Breece Hall or a Bijan in the first round. So that's my ideal superflex strategy would be, hey, get Bijan in round one and then an elite quarterback in round two. That would be my start. In a single quarterback league, I mean, yeah, you want Bijan, obviously.
You want How about just draft strategy this year is just draft Bijan?
I mean, get Bijan if you can. That is please.
Hey guys, would you take Bijan number one overall? Would that be a bad
format?
Pick? Yeah, okay.
Any format. Scott Fishbowl even. Scott Fishbowl kicked off today, and I wanted Bijan in round one, and I am on the clock right now, and he's off the board, and so the question is, do I go Breece Hall or do I go a quarterback? A lot of people are telling me to draft Anthony Richardson because there's a carry bonus, but in a seasonal format, Bijan Robinson in particular is going to go so nuclear this year that I think he's going to outscore Christian McCaffrey. He could easily be the 101 in all formats. He's amazing. But in a single quarterback league, I still lean CeeDee Lamb. Full PPR. Yeah. I'm still going CeeDee Lamb over Bijan Robinson, as nuclear as Bijan could go. 400 plus fantasy points this year. As nuclear as potential he has, because he, unlike A-Chain, he has the all-purpose back profile, and there have been no signals that that team is going to treat him more like a satellite back plus, which is my concern with Breece Hall, especially based on the draft that they had. They not only drafted, the Wisconsin. Anytime it's the Wisconsin bell cow, that's always got to be a concern. Hey, they drafted the Wisconsin bell cow. Forget if it's Braylon Allen or Ron Dane, whoever it would be. You're like, okay, this is a signal that this team sees a Breece Hall more of like an all-purpose passing game weapon as opposed to just an overall all-purpose weapon, which is what Bijan Robinson is. So, and Bijan's just that talented as well. Bijan's that good. Remember, Breece Hall was a second-round pick. I mean, Bijan Robinson was a top 10 pick. So
and
but even in that, so I'm between Hall and Bijan as running backs. I'm going to go Bijan, and then when I'm comparing all positions, I'm comparing Bijan and Lamb, and I got to go Lamb. I got to go Lamb in Dynasty. I'm going to go Lamb in seasonal leagues. I'm always going to go Lamb there in single quarterback leagues. The weird thing is, though, in Superflex, I'm more likely, because quarterbacks will displace a number of these high-quality wide receivers multiple rounds, I'm actually more likely to go Bijan in the first round over a quarterback in Superflex, but in single quarterback, because I know all those elite receivers are going to be gone, I got to get my Lamb if I have the chance.
Lamb for me, I think, is my 101 in single QB right now. I think we're chasing Marvin Harrison Sr.'s target total. It's going to be a historical target total number for CeeDee Lamb. We already saw him go over 180 last year, and he simply doesn't have any teammate competition at the wide receiver spot. Jake Ferguson, I think, is going to be the number 2 target on Dallas. And we also have a running back position that doesn't have a guy. Unlike last year, we had Tony Pollard. We were drafting him at the 1-2 turn in single QB. Now we have guys who are not even in the dead zone. Rico Dowdle and Zeke Elliott, you can double tap those guys deep right now in redraft leagues. So for me, CeeDee Lamb has the perfect combination of role, talent, plus he's just in that perfect age range where he's in peak wide receiver age production. Lamb checks off all the boxes. I'll say the one other player, Matt, that we can't completely discount in redraft right now is Tyreek Hill. I'd throw Tyreek Hill into that situation based on what he's been able to do the last 2 years in Miami, based on the fact that we think Miami's offense might lead the NFL in scoring. Tyreek has just been so good. The usage has been just remarkable, and this could be the year that he goes over 2,000 receiving yards. He was neck and neck with CeeDee Lamb last year in points per game. Had that, the limited at the end of the year, played through it a lot of times, but he was limited with being kind of beat up towards the end of the season. Really the only argument for Lamb over Hill, and I agree with you, it's the age for me. You don't want to necessarily bet on that 30-year-old, but I could see a season where Tyreek Hill is like 25 points per game.
Hey, guys, CeeDee Lamb, weeks 1 through 6 before the bye, wide receiver 24. Yep. After the bye, wide receiver 1 overall. So if they do pick up that game plan that they started after the bye, CeeDee Lamb is, it's easy to see him on the cover of all the fantasy magazines that still exist, right?
I just drafted him in the Scott Fish Bowl. I just drafted him, and everyone wants Anthony Richardson, Kyler Murray, the Russian quarterbacks, leveraging that the scoring. Oh, maybe Kelsey, run it back with Kelsey one more time in the first round of the Scott Fish Bowl. I talked about it on the last Minded Mansion show. Just because the scoring seems to favor a couple other positions doesn't mean you ignore the position that's not getting the scoring favoritism. Actually, that's more of an incentive to make sure you get the super hyper elite guy at that position to get the points, and then that the scoring is going to help you with whatever tight end you end up drafting. whatever quarterback you end up drafting. Okay, you want to go with a rushing quarterback, a mobile quarterback? Well, there are mobile quarterbacks available in the next few rounds. Like the best value mobile quarterback is Deshaun Watson, right?
I mean, Daniel Jones, who nobody wants, is a good rushing quarterback.
Right. You can get Daniel Jones and Deshaun Watson. In these types of formats where you have to choose to be weak somewhere, in Superflex, tight end premium, we start 3 receivers, multiple flex positions. You're going to have to be weak somewhere in most formats. And so in that particular case, I'm going to look at the position that's getting the favorable scoring. And typically I'm going to like, okay, I'll dabble in that position. I'll take one quarterback, but then the only way I'm going to actually win the whole thing, win the tournament, is if I hit the lottery with my second quarterback. The last thing I'm going to do in that, like for example, in a Superflex league, the last thing I'm going to do is go quarterback. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing because the part of the way a lot of these leagues are won is you go elite QB1, and then you got to try to hit on it up. And this year, I think this is the year to try to hit on a rookie. You try to hit on whether it's maybe possibly, right? What if I can get the starting quarterback for Washington in the second round? Who's to say that Jaden Daniels isn't going to outscore Anthony Richardson this year? It's very possible. I could see it. In fact, it's close to a coin flip.
There's a lot of good projectors out there that have those stats almost identical. I mean, just the only thing that separates them is the rushing touchdowns, right? Projection. Whereas Anthony Richardson, you could probably project for like 8 or 9, and Jaden Daniels probably a little less. And as you know, rushing touchdowns will drop you in the rankings, but projection-wise, passing yards, rushing yards, you're right. There's not much difference between Anthony Richardson and Jaden Daniels.
I think the cheat code this year in Superflex and 2QB leagues is the rookie class. This rookie class is better than anyone is ready for. Now, we're ready for a great class. I mean, this was a highly touted class by all the big-time draft analysts, the hardcore film scouts. They all recognize this is a great QB class. But we're talking about what if we get multiple CJ Stroud level outcomes this year from this rookie class? There's a lot of possibilities. J.J. McCarthy ended up in Minnesota with that passing game and those weapons. Right? It's very possible he greatly exceeds expectations. We have no idea how the wide receiver room is going to come together in New England. And Drake May could be everything that was advertised and more. Caleb Williams has always been seen as the chosen one, and yet Jaden Daniels is being drafted before him in fantasy football. What if they're both top 5 scorers in fantasy? What if they're both CJ Stroud?
I think that's sort of you can make an argument that the Caleb Williams is an arbitrage play right now in all formats to where CJ Stroud is getting drafted. It's a similar bet with more of a rushing upside. Obviously, we're asking the Chicago offense to take a huge step forward, but it's an arbitrage play off of Stroud, and certainly Jaden Daniels is an arbitrage play off of Anthony Richardson. I would bet on Anthony Richardson to have more rushing touchdowns and more rushing yards, but if you told me 6 months from now Jaden Daniels leads him in both categories, I'd say, okay, I think it's close enough right there. They're both super, super appealing. I would also say that there's some value right now in Jordan Love, who in those Superflex drafts is going a little bit lower than the elite tier. Like, we're sort of expecting, with Jordan Love's valuation right now, that we're sort of expecting him to kind of maintain his track from last year. But what if he's better? And what if the Green Bay Packers offense takes a huge step forward? I think he's also sort of an X factor and an unknown upside guy, despite his massive, first full year as starter. So I agree with you. There's some value in that low-end QB1, sort of high-end QB2 range of quarterback right now in Superflex.
Should we call this hero QB strategy? Are we coining something today, Matt Kelly?
Think about it, man. Think about it. Look at all these quarterbacks. Look at all these quarterbacks. When you go down the board, it's like out to QB 20. I don't know if I've ever seen the quarterback position this deep. when you're crafting a draft strategy, you have to understand the depth and the tiers at these various positions. At the running back position, who is the fourth running back that you think could break into the big three?
Jonathan Taylor?
Jahmyr Gibbs, by a mile. By a mile.
Gibbs, Taylor.
Jahmyr Gibbs. Give me Jahmyr Gibbs.
Why are you not saying what I think is the obvious choice here? Saquon Barkley.
Yes.
Saquon Barkley is Saquon Barkley. Saquon is Saquon. Saquon Barkley, and he went to the Eagles, man. Like this is the underreported move for fantasy football of the entire offseason. That the running back that we've all been impressed with and touting as one of the great talents at the position finally got rescued, but also at the same time lamenting that he's stuck behind a bad offensive line with a bad quarterback and no other options, and defense is stacking the box against him. And then he had the just because of the tush push, this gimmick that defenses are gonna be much better equipped to stop this year. That's the reason he's going to score a few less touchdowns because of a tush push. That's the reason why we're like, second round pick and redraft and Dynasty. I don't know. I'm going to go A-Chain over Barkley. What? I mean, you really, what's the probability that for the rest of their career, right, from here on, Barkley outscores A-Chain?
Well, don't even think the rest of the career. Say over the next 2 years, because that's what we care about, right? So
yeah,
I would
think
say
it's a 2-year bet, and for me, I think Saquon is fine in the second round. Like for me, I've drafted him when he's there in the second round. I haven't felt the need to push him up to like the 1-2 turn level. For me, it's the one thing that Philadelphia offense, it presents him a great opportunity for rushing touchdowns, but he had that. He had 10 2 years ago in New York. For me, it's the receiving work, Matt. It's like Saquon, when he's peak Saquon, is a guy that's going 60 receptions. Last year was a 41 reception year in New York, and that was a big time disappointment. Is there a willingness for this offense to target Saquon, to make that part of the weekly game plan? Obviously, DeAndre Swift is not the back that Saquon is historically. DeAndre Swift has had a very good NFL career, doesn't have those peak seasons like Saquon with the RB1 overall finish. But for me, is Philly going to use him as a receiver? Are we going to see that on a week-in, week-out basis? And if he is embraced in that role and they manufacture touches for him out of the backfield as a receiver, then I think he could really take off and have like a season where he could potentially have like a league winner type outcome in the second round. But
this
if they
is
don't
the
do
year,
that,
right? Isn't this the McCaffrey goes to the 49ers? Like there's always a year where the player, whether it's a wide receiver, running back, that this skill position player who's been languishing in a league bottom situation gets that airlift to
Fournette.
safety, to freedom.
Remember Leonard
AJ
Fournette to
Brown,
the Tampa?
How about A.J. Brown as a Philadelphia Eagle? A.J.
Right.
Brown comes over there from Tennessee. We see what he does in a better offense. It's sort of the running back version. It's a touchdown bet, though. Like for Saquon.
But I'm just saying, historically, if you just don't think about stats for a second. You think about this level talent player going into this situation at this point in his career, year one with the new team, it's almost always a fireworks show. Almost always. Like this is the scenario that you're dreaming of for fantasy football, where a guy's going to exceed expectations. And like I said, the running back 4-5 spot in Dynasty is wide open. You could see Saquon starting super hot, Christian McCaffrey starting cool, and then they're right there for that RB4 spot in Dynasty. And Saquon Barkley is suddenly in the top 3 in seasonal leagues. But in Dynasty in particular, the big 3, Bijan, Jahmyr Gibbs, Breece Hall, these are the 3 running backs that you're considering in the first round in a single quarterback league. Theo, in the single quarterback startups you've done in Dynasty, have you gotten more Robinson, Gibbs, or Hall. I'm going to guess Gibbs because I know you love Gibbs, and Gibbs is available in the first half of the first round as opposed to going at the 101. It's just very difficult to get Bijan, and you may not have even been enough startups to get any Bijan because you never had the 101 this year. So between Gibbs and Hall, who have you gotten more of in the first round of startups?
Don't answer this yet, Theo. Don't answer, because we're going to take a short break before Theo reveals which one of those running backs that he gets most and why. Because this relates to our draft strategy. But first, short break from those good enough to sponsor this podcast.
Hey, why do we partner with the FFPC? Because they have the widest variety of fantasy football formats, and it's the easiest place to find all types of fantasy football contests in the world. What if you want to play for high stakes? Well, they have a $6 million prize pool with their Fantasy Players Championship. They also have way too early best ball leagues that start in February and Dynasty leagues. They have the closest thing to a liquid market for orphans that there is in all of Dynasty. And the FFPC has sponsored us for half a decade because we are actually delivering information that can help fantasy gamers, and they're generating so much interest into bringing in so many new users, casual users even. The FFPC creates a unique experience where you can both compete against the best and make money. Use promo code UNDERWORLD to get $25 off your first team. $25 off your first team at the FFPC with promo code UNDERWORLD. Go get it!
All right, let's not, bury what we were talking about here before that break. Theo, which one of those elite running backs do you find yourself landing on most in Dynasty Startup?
So for me, actually, Matt was correct. I haven't had an opportunity to draft either in a startup this year. For my roster percentages on FFPC, I'm actually at 26% Jahmyr Gibbs. He was a priority of mine, as you guys recall, last year in every single rookie draft and also in startups last year when the value was there. He's still a solid value where he's going, but I'm at 26%. So it's sort of, I know, Alan, you don't love the portfolio talk, but I have a lot of Jahmyr Gibbs. I'm also 20%.
I love portfolio talk. That's a good
Alan
talking
thinks
point.
It alienates the one league dynasty manager.
Well, because you have 26% Gibbs, doesn't that mean you may be more inclined to go Hall if you had the opportunity?
Yes, I think that's a good way of putting it. I think if it was a split it down the middle, I'd like to have exposure to both of those guys. I do think that there is an argument to be made that Jahmyr Gibbs, the fact that he plays in Detroit, an offense that's incredibly stable, one that we think is sort of pointing up, and we have a sample size of 2 straight years from Ben Johnson, I think he's almost more of a stable asset. That being said, I think Breece Hall has the higher ceiling this year. I'm happy to draft both this year, sort of where they're going, though, Matt. To your point, I prefer Bijan Robinson ahead of Breece Hall, but Breece Hall, middle of the first, I'm okay with. I've drafted him a couple times in some FFPC leagues. And Jahmyr Gibbs, I routinely draft at like that 1-2 turn. A lot of times on Underdog, you see Jahmyr Gibbs falling to like the 201, 202, FFPC, end of the first round. I think they're both exceptional talents, and I think they both, like we talk about continually on the Sonic Truth and also on our Player Profiler podcast, we want these running backs who can catch passes. We saw it last year with Breece Hall. Jahmyr Gibbs, though, the potential to take a huge step forward as a receiver is something that I don't think people are talking about enough. This was a profile where when he was coming out of Alabama, that was what got us most excited. That was like the Alvin Kamara, Reggie Bush-like outcome. He was way more effective as a runner last year than maybe we would have projected during his rookie year. And receiving-wise, though, he only caught like 52 passes, which is fine for a rookie, but it's definitely was a disappointment based on where we thought he could have finished. I thought this was a guy that could have challenged for like a Saquon Barkley rookie year like reception total. So for me, it's a Jahmyr Gibbs. I think there's not a ton of buzz about what he's going to do in year 2. He's sort of just like a value pick for people. But for me, it's like I'm super excited about having 26%
Theo,
Jahmyr Gibbs. I think he's going to go nuts this year.
Let me tag on to this Gibbs thing real quick, because we were in that Draft Sharks mock draft for Dynasty, Podfather, and I was on the clock at 109, and I was faced with the Gibbs or Puka type of, which asset do you want as your foundational? And then when I took Gibbs, the question that the draft had for me is, why do you take a running back in the first round? I think that what Theo said, just to underline the one point, is that Gibbs can be treated as if he is a wide receiver as far as like longevity, stability, because he for top 12 real NFL drafted running back is almost a near lock if he performs decently to get a second contract. So when you're talking about
longevity. Oh, sorry, Alan. I took Bijan in that same draft at the 106. So
that's even
was the 5 straight wide receivers, and then I went Bijan, and it's sort of like that draft was very wide receiver. There was a lot of wide receiver enthusiasts in that draft.
But that makes sense but you passed on some of the, the elite profile guys, which again, I don't disagree with. I think Bijan can be 101 in Dynasty if you want him to be, but it really gets down to when you get those like shaky, like would anybody be surprised if Puka Nacua is like wide receiver 18 this year, right? Like that could happen.
I've talked about this. Yeah, Puka Nacua, one season, late round pick, was amazing. Right, I talked about this with Andrew Cooper on the last Mind of Mansion show, and he reminded us that there's a similar profile, an early round pick, second round pick, as opposed to a day 3 pick, but more of a slot receiver profile, lacking straight line speed coming out of college, but certainly very polished at the professional level at an early age. Juju Smith-Schuster. We've seen this before. We've seen young receivers in a particular situation where they were across from a big-time alpha who was aging, get thrust into a situation where the team's passing a lot, and the next thing you know, Ben Roethlisberger's leading the league in pass attempts, and across from Antonio Brown, there's Juju Smith-Schuster going for 1,400 yards.
Matt, is he the riskiest first-round pick in 2024 leagues, Puka Nacua?
I would not draft him in the first round in Dynasty or any leagues. Right. I'm not drafting Puka. That's not what there's too many more stable options that have higher floors and I think equivalent ceilings to Puka Nacua, all the way down to Jalen Waddle, Chris Olave, that you don't need to swing. And that's the thing. It's like understanding the depth of the position and where the tier breaks are. In Dynasty, there's a big 3. Just like in seasonal leagues, it's a big 3. It's just a different big 3, right? The big 3 in seasonal leagues is Bijan, Breece Hall, and Christian McCaffrey. And you swap out McCaffrey for Gibbs in Dynasty. And if I can get a Jahmyr Gibbs at, like, say, the 110 in a single quarterback league, I'm doing that. And he's gone at the 110. There's plenty of drafts where Jahmyr Gibbs falls to the 109, 110. And I'm guessing, Theo, if you had 0% of all players, this is your first startup ever, you would absolutely co-sign that draft pick of Jahmyr Gibbs there, knowing 100%. The types of wide receivers you can get in round 2, 3, 4, and how quickly things drop. Where now, a few picks later, running backs are off the board. Suddenly, the best running back is Travis Etienne. Like, it happens that quick, where a bunch of receivers go off the board, and yet Waddle's still available. So that's where the depth of the position really matters, and that's where in a single quarterback league, and I don't have, and I'm less likely to have to make this decision to be weak somewhere. I'm like, well, I can be strong everywhere. And part of being strong everywhere is taking a running back in the first round, going hero RB, knowing I can get a second running back like a Blake Corum in all formats later, and he could be Kyren Williams this year. In fact, I think there's a higher probability he's Kyren Williams than Kyren Williams. So, and then you don't have to be weak anywhere, right? You can have 2 awesome running backs, and then all those picks in between, you're pounding wide receivers. So there's a very strong case this year for hero RB in all formats for that reason.
I think what's interesting with your guys' Puka Nacua argument, and I wouldn't say I'm anti Puka Nacua, but it's just the competition at wide receiver around him is top notch. Like it's an AJ Brown versus Puka Nacua argument because those guys are going right next to one another. And then Matt, when you look at the wide receivers going sort of right behind Puka Nacua, they all have elite profiles and I think elite ceilings this year as well. Garrett Wilson actually had more targets than Puka Nacua last year. Garrett Wilson had 168 targets and Puka Nacua was like 159. Then you have the two huge or big alpha wide receivers with youth on their side, huge potential touchdown ceilings in Marvin Harrison Jr. and Drake London. And obviously Marvin Harrison Jr. is a little bit of a leap of faith because we haven't seen him on an NFL field, but he's about as good as it gets prospect-wise. Certainly a better prospect than Puka was. And Drake London, if we're betting on this Atlanta offense to go absolutely nuclear, then Drake London sort of in the Cooper Kupp role is something we could bet on. Like a Drake London with 155 targets is a really strong proposition. So I'm not anti Puka Nacua, but there's certainly competition around him at the wide receiver spot. And then, like you said, the positional scarcity and upside of a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs. It's just sort of it's a tough click because there's a lot of competition right around him.
Think about a guy you can get in the second round. Think about a guy you get in the third round. Rome Odunze, he goes third round.
We're talking Dynasty startup now. Yep.
Dynasty startup. Rome Odunze goes third round. Jalen Waddle goes at the 2-3 turn. Think about this, guys. Think about this. The number one advantage that we have in Dynasty, and this has been true since the beginning of Dynasty, since the launching of the format, and I was just in Maine visiting my family, and I talked to a bunch of people at barbecues and family events, and they use PlayerProfiler, and they're getting into Dynasty for the first time.
By the way, Matt, I want to just, you said they use PlayerProfiler. I was watching videos on them from other content creators. This is a sidebar, but it is PlayerProfiler related. And everybody uses PlayerProfiler in their content. These guys that get 50,000, 100,000 views on their football videos, it's amazing to me that it is something, and they all give you credit. They all say PlayerProfiler. I'm kind of passively listening, and then I hear, per PlayerProfiler, the guy was using the injury thing. Like it showed all the injuries on the player.
Right.
So I didn't mean to sidetrack you, but it is truly amazing. I forget how useful the site is, and that these mega content creators from all over the football, real football and fantasy football cite and use PlayerProfiler. So sorry for the quick tangent there.
So I'm talking to these guys. These are young kids. These are kids that are going to college, right? They're 18, they're 19. Yep. Right, I got a bunch of cousins and younger cousins. I'm the oldest cousin in my whole extended family. So I still got these cousins that are going to college, and they're bringing their friends over, and they're like, yeah, I'm in my first Dynasty league. Like, what do I do, Podfather? And then the number one thing that you can do is take advantage of age. You're like, why do you guys show age out to the first decimal point? That's annoying. He's 23. Why do you have to show him as 23.1? Because Dynasty leaguers use our site more than any other. And 23.1 is a fucking big difference for a running back than 23.9. Right? Literally, if the guy's 24.1, he's before the age apex. If he's 24.9, he's past the age apex. It can mean the difference between being pre and post apex. That's a big deal. And it's a really big deal in Dynasty when you look up in these Dynasty startups and Christian McCaffrey's going in the first round. And spoiler alert, we don't have him in the first round on our rankings, right? Look where Tyreek Hill's going. Tyreek Hill's going first round. We don't have Tyreek Hill in the first round in our Dynasty rankings. That is the first edge. We would be remiss not to acknowledge the first edge, which is the star players that are well past the age apex will always go many picks too early, because you're going to have new Dynasty players that do not appreciate the true valuation. And as soon as they draft them, they've lost a significant portion of their value because they go to trade with people that are much more age sensitive, because it's Dynasty, and suddenly they're like, wait, I can't get what I thought. Wait, no one wants McCaffrey? What the hell's going on? You're like, dude, McCaffrey's 28 years old. This is a Dynasty league. Why the hell did you draft him at the 106? What are you doing, dude? You know, you could have had Gibbs. Do you realize what you could get for Gibbs in trade? That's why we have a lifetime value rating. The lifetime value rating on Gibbs versus Christian McCaffrey, the difference is like 100 points. Okay, you could get a whole other great player plus McCaffrey if you were going to be trading away Gibbs. But the thing is, if you drafted Gibbs, you would never trade him because he's 22 years old and he's on the Lions. Yeah, and he's going to go, as Theo said, nuclear.
Yeah.
Friend of the show, Scott Connor, talks about this, and I've really adopted this and have talked about it in my own podcast about drafting players that other people like, not that are just good, right? Because then you can use those guys in trades. Not necessarily players that you think will be better than the other, but hey, will the market like this player? And I think that, Matt, you're highlighting that perfectly. Like, the market will like Gibbs better. Not that you're looking to trade him, but it can get you to the table on getting to an elite quarterback if you want to, or something like that.
But you need to be careful, though. I'm not going to reach for that guy, and I'm certainly not going to make sure I'm not going to draft Puka for that reason.
Right.
I'm not going to draft Puka for that reason because I also know everybody is going to be in love with Malik Neighbors when he gets 12 targets in week 1. So I'm not drafting Puka Nacua when Malik Neighbors can be had. If I could trade down 5 picks and still get Neighbors, or 10 picks and still get Neighbors, that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to draft fucking Puka Nacua in that spot. But later in the draft, absolutely. Later in the draft, the brand equity of a player really matters. Absolutely. So, for example, I might like Jaden Reed, right? I might like Jaden Reed. But I also know that people right now, they love Nico Collins. So I could say, I could draft Nico now. I can get Jaden Reed around from now. I'll draft Nico Collins, knowing the upside is incredible in that offense, right? And that I could trade him. Like, that would be a move. That would be Xavier Worthy, right? Xavier Worthy, everybody loves Xavier Worthy, tethered to Mahomes. You might want to trade him before week 1. If he doesn't get a lot of snaps week 1, he doesn't play as much as people want, and doesn't put up any numbers in week 1, suddenly he starts to lose value. So that is something to be cognizant of. But there's who would be a player, Theo, that you would be willing to draft to trade?
I think when it comes down to it, it's a number of these quarterbacks, Matt. I think when you're in a super flex startup, when people sort of play quarterback roulette and the values start to fall. I have a recent Dynasty startup where it was an FFPC one, and I drafted CJ Stroud and Caleb Williams as my 2 QBs. I maneuvered up. I got back in the back half of the first round. I started with those 2 guys. I'm set for the next 10 years, be printing cash with those 2 guys at my quarterback spots in Superflex. But Will Levis fell to a spot where I didn't necessarily need him with this build. I could have waited and taken a QB3 that was a little less likely to have trade value. But my thinking is if this offense takes a big step forward, Will Levis is going to gain dynasty value this year, and he will be appealing to people because of his age, his role, and the fact that they're a pass-happy offense that is taking a big step forward. I don't think Will Levis has exceptional ceiling, but I do think he improve and be like a top 15 QB value in Superflex, I think, rather quickly if this offense turns. So a player like that, I'm willing to dive into. I think when you start doing it at some other positions in Superflex, it can be a little bit dangerous because of the age apex with the running backs and the wide receivers. Like a lot of times the values that drop are like the older running backs. You would be diving into a potential short-term asset. With the quarterbacks, it's a long-term asset. You have multiple trade windows.
I'm going to answer your question concisely, Podfather. A player that I've drafted that I don't even like is Jermaine Burton, just because I know he's got hype, right? And if he does anything in September, I might be able to get like a first round pick. I know that sounds crazy now, and it would have been wrong to sell Tank Dell for a single first last year, but that option at least is on the table if he does 8 for 80 and a touchdown in week 2.
Okay.
I'll trade you for Jermaine Burton.
But here is the cutoff for me. Okay. I think that's a great call. Players that are in certain situations tethered to a Joe Burrow, came from Alabama, right? They have a mythology about them.
You can leaving next year.
You can see it coming. You can see it coming from a mile away, right? And yet, still, because third round, going to be available, right? Great call. He hits even a little bit, gets on the field, scores a touchdown week 1, flip him. Hit and flip, hit and flip. Is he going to be better than Jamar Chase? No. Flip him. Okay. I would not do that with some of these more busterific wide receivers that go earlier from this rookie class. So I would not do that with a Keon Coleman. With a Keon Coleman, it's too risky. It's too risky. He's not going to fall that much. So even if you could get value trapped into picking him, right? Then he goes full Quentin Johnston in the first couple weeks. Suddenly he's leaking value. You have to sell low or hold and pray. How are those people feeling? Those people that had Quentin Johnston last year, they were in this situation where they were hoping every week, okay, this is the week that I can finally get some trade value for this guy. And then every week they're seeing it go down. And they're like, well, I can't trade him now. He's lost too much value. And then it just goes down. That's my case for selling low. I like to sell low if I get in that situation because I know the guy is eventually going to go to 0 and you might as well get something for him. That's the whole case for selling low. The larger case is just don't put yourself in that position with wide receivers drafted in that particular scenario where they weren't big producers in college, not super athletic, but do have this incredible tape that suggests they're more athletic on film in real life than they are when they're tested, which is silly. And then they go to a place that has this starving for targets. Oh, man, right? That was Quentin Johnston last year. And we've been fooled so many times. And then smart people get fooled every year. I get fooled. We all get fooled, right? I was on N'Keal Harry. I thought N'Keal Harry was a dominant college player. I thought, man, there's these whispers you can't separate, but clearly the Patriots thought that he could separate just fine, and I'm going to draft him. And no, right? So that I would not do. A Kyron Williams, you cannot play that game with Kyron Williams. There's certain players you're playing with fire, and you will get burned if you try to play this game. Kyron Williams picks up another injury in training camp or preseason, and suddenly they open the season with Blake Corum in the backfield. Haven't we seen this? Is it every year? We look up, one year it was the 49ers with Elijah Mitchell. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Like, wait, it's Elijah Mitchell? What happened? Wait, what? Huh?
What happened to TDP? Tyrion Davis-Price was supposed to be the guy.
What about Tyrion Davis-Price? What about running back X? He was supposed to be the starter. What happened? And it's like, no, man. Blake Corum dominated throughout camp. And if you were following the team, you knew they're super high on this player, and you shouldn't be surprised when he's in the starting lineup week 1. And now you're like, oh, man, I was trying to get cute with Kyron Williams. Whoops.
I will say that the one strategy for drafting players that you can flip, and Scott has talked about this as well, whether I'm rebuilding or whether I have a contender, when I am stocking my bench with handcuff running backs, I'm going to have multiple opportunities to use them or move them. For example, if I get a few week window of a solid like-for-like handcuff running back, like an Elijah Mitchell. Let's say Christian McCaffrey misses 3 weeks, something not crazy, but a 3-week injury. I'm going to be able to start Elijah Mitchell and get top 15 running back production. I'm sure he'd be ranked top 15 for us at Player Profiler with our weekly rankings if he had that backfield lead to himself. But on the flip side, if my team was in a position where I could trade him, then these running backs who get even short-term opportunities command trade value. They're going to command trade value to the Christian McCaffrey team first and foremost. And then there's going to be other teams sort of playing RB2 roulette throughout the season where they're looking for short-term windows of running backs, whether it's off the waiver wire, whether it's through trades, and I'm going to be able to trade those sort of guys. So, like, there's plenty of guys right now that are handcuff running backs that the market right now is a lot lower than if they had even a short-term window. Matt, what would you pay for a Will Shipley right now versus what would you pay for a Will Shipley if Saquon Barkley missed 8 games? Like that sort of scenario, a Ray Davis with James Cook. Like these kind of guys.
That's why you got to play it out.
Yeah.
You got to play out the whole draft. You got to play out the whole draft. That's why you got to do mock drafts. Yeah. Play out the whole draft. And you realize, wait, all I want to do is load up on running back. I want all these rookie running backs. I don't have enough roster space to accommodate all these rookie running backs and second-year running backs that I want. So what does that mean? That means that your instinct to draft a second running back, maybe in round 5, should be avoided. Right? That's how you do it. That's how you're like, wait a second, if I'm gonna have 7 running backs and one of them is gonna hit within the first month of the season, I'm confident. That's the thing you need. That's the evidence you need to convince yourself not to get value trapped. Not to get value trapped. You're like, man, I'm going to draft Aaron Jones here. No, wait, right? Don't do it. Go get all these Shipleys,
Blake Corum. I mean, I know that's,
well,
earlier
Blake Corum's
on.
a little earlier. I was trying to think of a running back that's a little bit less.
Dylan
all
Lobby,
these
your
Roshan
favorite.
Johnsons, all these Kendre Millers, and have the confidence that they're going to hit. And guess what? If you don't get the guy that's going to hit, you can use your fab on the guy that does hit.
Right. That's right.
You can always use your fab on the guy that does hit. It doesn't matter. Even if you're wrong, you're going to be right. When you go hero RB, that's the beauty. Even if you're wrong, you're right if you go hero RB. The other type of position that I think I'm fine drafting, even if I'm not super sold on the player, is an elite tight end. Even if I think that, let's say, Dalton Kincaid's overrated or Brock Bowers is overrated, those guys are going to have value. They're going to have value for a long time. Fantasy gamers will give them plenty of rope. You have the whole season and more for Brock Bowers to hit. Even if Michael Mayer comes out and outproduces him early, no one is going to be concerned. This is the process. Running backs are the types of guys that are going to produce right away. Tight ends, very different. Right? They take time. They can take years. Right? Of course, Michael Mayer, he was a huge producer at Notre Dame. Of course, he's going to outproduce Brock Bowers for the first few weeks. Don't worry. It's not going to affect his dynasty value at all. It's super insulated to the start of the season. The reason I mentioned Keon Coleman is because Keon Coleman's value is driven by the notion that he could be the wide receiver 1 in week 1. And if that is revealed to be false, then his valuation goes down. That's why I'd be more willing to play that game with Ricky Pearsall. I'd be much more willing to play that game with Ricky Pearsall knowing the expectations early are low and you can still flip him for something close to on par value. Whereas if, and I hope this doesn't happen, but because I've drafted 0 of him, I hope it does. If Keon Coleman is disappointing in the first few weeks, then he's going to lose a quarter of his dynasty value. It's going to be gone.
Guys, the guaranteed guy to go up, and Podfather, this is going to make you smile here, but Penix, doesn't matter what draft pick you paid for him, the minute he gets a clarified start, you can get 2 first-rounders for him.
That's basically the strategy that Theo laid out with Will Levis, but a more premium version of that strategy. Imagine the Will Levis strategy, but a couple rounds earlier, and having even more insulated value. That's Penix.
Levis gets drafted before Penix, right? Theo, doesn't he usually go?
It's close, give or take in these
Sharp
FFPC
drafters
leagues.
are taking him about a round earlier, but either way.
Penix is interesting too because even if he doesn't play a down this year, he's still going to maintain dynasty value because you'll be a year closer to him starting, sort of like a countdown clock with Kirk Cousins. So
he'll be more valuable, right? He'll be more valuable next year if he doesn't play it down than he is right now.
Yeah, he's definitely got some insulation if you have patience and you don't need to use a QB. He's definitely interesting. And I like what Matt talked about with elite tight ends have a ton of insulation, and all we need to do is look at Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts had 2 down seasons where he let us down at ADP in all formats, dynasty startups, best ball, redraft, you name it. And now we're back to it where Kyle Pitts has actually gained value because of a coordinator change. And we're all on board with it. I think Kyle Pitts to the moon this year. So, they definitely maintain that value.
Interestingly, if Pitts disappoints in the first 3 weeks, he will lose less percentage value than London. If London struggles for the first 3 weeks, his dynasty value will go down significantly.
Agreed.
He's less insulated because he's coming from a place where Pitts had the 1,000-yard season. Pitts is widely viewed as one of the best tight end talents of all time. And now that he has Kirk Cousins, and knowing that the tight end position is also volatile, right? Look at George Kittle. George Kittle can go 3 weeks and produce nothing. And it's not like that's going to tank his dynasty value. Because we know tight end's a volatile position. And then, so that does give more benefit of the doubt, necessarily. Who do you think is one of the most insulated wide receivers for dynasty valuation? Who would you consider one of the best?
Marvin Harrison Jr.
Okay.
Marvin Harrison Jr. is so. I mean, okay. So if we drop down,
okay, sorry,
I
meant.
Matt.
I meant. Okay,
Roma
let me be more specific.
Yeah.
Apologies. Outside the top 25. Okay, outside the top 25 players drafted, right? Starting with CeeDee Lamb, all the way down to Brandon Ayuk.
Lad McConkey is the guy who's insulated.
Anyone below Brandon Ayuk. Brandon Ayuk is very insulated. Brandon Ayuk gets traded, he's going to be great. Brandon Ayuk stays with the 49ers, he's going to be great. He's right at the age apex for his position. He has performed consistently and doesn't have a particular sort of role that he has to fill in a particular offense. He can play X, he can play Z, he can play slot, super versatile. Let's go below Ayuk. Give me a wide receiver that you think is the most insulated.
Pittman, I mean, there's a million of them.
Yeah, it depends on the ranges. Like you're talking about guys.
Well, I don't think there's a million of them. I think people are rooting for Tank Dell to fail.
I got you.
I think if Tank Dell starts slow, that's very bad for Tank Dell.
Right. He will not. You won't even be able to get a first rounder for him if he has.
If Tank Dell misses time again, then
he's going to confirm everyone's biases.
No, that's good. This is actually a really good conversation because I just kind of yelled out Pittman, but if Pittman has 2 bad weeks, he doesn't lose value, so he's insulated in that range you're talking about. But like you said, Dell and a whole bunch of other guys. It's like, I guess this is really the litmus test. If they have 2 or 3 bad weeks in a row to start the season, can you still get a first rounder for them? Right? I mean, more or less, that's the litmus test that I'm using here. So it is a very.
Sorry, Alan. One guy who's interesting because you're not seeing cheap dynasty trades for him, but he has lost a little bit of value in dynasty startups because of his current team situation. One guy who I think is very insulated, especially because he had a very strong rookie season and his NFL draft capital, is Jordan Addison.
I knew you were going to say it.
Matt talked about J.J. McCarthy as a quarterback who we are enthusiastic about at PlayerProfiler, but you're talking about a very young player who probably won't be on the field to start the season. I imagine it's going to be a month before we see J.J. McCarthy. I think that they won't rush him on the field. But that's a player with Jordan Addison where if Addison's stats regress from year 1 to year 2, I think that's what the market is betting on. But you're not going to be able to go and make a low ball trade for Jordan Addison, a guy who was a top 25 pick in the NFL draft, who had a very strong rookie year and is now attached to a will-be 22-year-old in J.J. McCarthy in an offense that we're betting on with strong signal callers. So I look at like Jordan Addison as a guy who the price is sort of baked in. He's got it, already has a pass for this season. There's so many analysts saying that he's going to regress that it's almost expected. So Jordan Addison is a guy where you're getting strong value in startups because of the little bit of a correction, but long-term value is insulated. And guys, if he produces like he did last year, then he is a massive win. So there's a lot of outs with drafting Jordan Addison.
I can tell you right now when J.J. McCarthy's going to start, guys. It's going to be week 6 because the Vikings have 5 tough games, and then week 6 is home. Well, it's not home. It's a international game against the Jets. That's the week.
Start him on the road internationally is an interesting argument, though.
Against the Jets defense?
Is that a...
but if they start 1-4, 0-5, okay, the next week
he's going to start before that. He's going to start week 3 or week 4.
All right. You think Minnesota's going to start 0-5? I don't think they're going to be that bad.
Not what could be 1-4. Here's the schedule. Week 1, they have San Fran. Week 2, they play the Texans. Week 3, on the road in Green Bay. And so it's week 4 that they play. Not week 6. It's week 4. They have an international game against the Jets. So what if they go 0-3? I think
week 4 is a good bet, but it certainly won't be week 6.
Sorry, I meant 4.
But it's not going to be because the Jets are an easy matchup. It's going to be a difficult matchup. But yeah, they could very easily be 0-3.
Right.
Absolutely.
It's October 6th.
Weird to roll a young guy out internationally, where you have all those like weird factors of like the being in.
Not if they bench Darnold in the second half of week 3.
Right.
I think it's guys. I think it could be week 2. Week 2 for McCarthy. You can just see it now. San Francisco wipes the floor with them week 1. Where is the Houston game? Is it in Minnesota?
Okay, so you know what? Let me backtrack a little bit. Week 1, the Vikings are at the Giants, right? So we're going to give them. I missed a game here. September 8th is the start of the season. Let's go through this. This is important. So week 1, they're at the Giants. Let's give them the win there, okay? Then week 2, they're home against San Fran. Let's give them a loss. They're 1-1. I think then week 3, they're home against the Texans. They'll probably be favored there, right?
That's the McCarthy start. McCarthy starts against Houston at home.
Second half, like Matt said, though. It'll be a bad start for the Vikings. Week 3, in comes J.J. McCarthy, wills them to a win.
Right.
And then you get a game
the thing with
belt
Addison is, let's get back to, can we get back to Addison? I mean, no one really cares when J.J. McCarthy is exactly going to start. I'm saying it's going to be week 4. But it could be week 3, and it's not going to be any of those other weeks. He's not going to start week 1. He's not going to start week 2. The only thing is he could just flat out start week 3. Don't forget, the Giants have a good defense.
Yeah.
Okay, this is the thing. The Giants could sneak a win in there. How it's probably going to work is the Giants win week 1. Just they're much better than people think. They could have one of the best defense in the league.
They'll be favored at home.
Right, they're going on the road to New York, so they lose in New York, a close game, then they get blown out by San Francisco. He's the starter week 3. That's probably what ends up happening. Jordan Addison is going to get the benefit of the doubt for a lot of reasons. Justin Jefferson's there, okay, and there's quarterback turnover early in the season, most likely. We have Jordan Addison and Jackson Smith-Njigba adjacent in the rankings. One guy has upside, the upside of being the true wide receiver 1 on his team in Jackson Smith-Njigba. The other guy in Addison, it's based on stability. That's a floor ranking for Addison. It's a ceiling ranking for Njigba. And it's still well ahead of market. So we're well ahead of market on a lot of these young receivers. George Pickens, Zay Flowers. Like, those are the 4 receivers in that age group that we're well ahead of market on. Like, we have all these guys ranked ahead of DK Metcalf. And DK Metcalf goes ahead of all of them in these startups, especially on Sleeper. Okay? But the problem is DK Metcalf has a couple underwhelming games, then suddenly everyone looks around and goes, that's when do people go sniffing around a guy's resume? That's the question, right? And with DK Metcalf, I think a bad 3 weeks, if he starts slow, the dynasty leaguers are going to start sniffing around that resume and go, wait a second. This guy's 27 years old. This guy's past the age apex. What has this guy done in the last 3 years? Nothing. Wait a second. Jackson Smith and Jigba's outscoring him. So DK Metcalf is a lot more fragile than people think, but Jackson Smith and Jigba also is much more fragile than Jordan Addison. Because if Jackson Smith and Jigba disappoints, I don't know what's going to happen. I believe Jackson Smith and Jigba will outproduce DK Metcalf in those first 3 weeks. He will be launched. It'll be a little mini launch. It's not going to be it won't be crazy fireworks, but it's going to be a little mini launch. And then there'll be a reckoning for DK Metcalf. That's my prediction for the first 3 weeks of the season. And Jordan Addison's just going to cruise along. One of the most stable assets. That's why we're so ahead of market on Addison. Is like, this is the type of player you want to be drafting. We are encouraging you to draft players like Jordan Addison. There's a reason why. It's one spot. But there's a reason why he is one spot ahead of Jackson Smith and Jigba, because all else equal, we want you to draft that stability. You can take plenty of chances. Dynasty leagues are deep. You go like 25 deep. Why are you taking huge swings in round 2, 3, 4? It doesn't make any sense. You have the whole draft. You have 20 rounds to go make swings. Take Jordan Addison and save yourself a whole bunch of heartburn.
Yeah, it's interesting, the DK Metcalf talk, because I think anytime you're sort of critical of DK Metcalf, you get a lot of pushback. He's a guy where people are really dug their heels in on him as a talent. And certainly he's a guy that I've had in fantasy and he's helped me out for years. But it's sort of it doesn't really match up with the actual production with the profile. His last 3 seasons, it's been wide receiver 20, wide receiver 24, and wide receiver 22 in points per game. That's just not cutting it when you're talking about a guy that people view as a true alpha in the NFL. So I'm with you. I think DK is he's definitely a shaky dynasty asset based on the fact that I think JSN is going to take a huge step forward. I'm back into JSN. Billy and I have another bet. Billy Muzio and I had a bet last year. I lost it to him. This year I'm going to win it. It's JSN takes a big step forward this year. And I think he definitely damages DK. And this coaching staff has continually praised JSN all offseason long, all of their OTAs. You have a new offensive coordinator in Seattle, a new head coach in Seattle, and I think they're both really banking on JSN. So I agree with you. I think JSN is an interesting one for this year in all formats. And Matt, he's going behind a lot of these rookie wide receivers, especially in redraft and in best ball. You're starting to see him go behind the Brian Thomases, the Keon Colemans, the Ladd McConkeys in a lot of drafts, because the newness of the situation, Xavier Worthy, throw him in there as well, where JSN last year sort of had that helium behind his name, let people down, and now they're willing to take chances on some of these younger players with really no profile, and we're kind of back at it. So JSN is now a value. There's drafts where he goes right next to Jamison Williams in the FFPC Hardway League. And again, this was weeks ago. I took him, and Jamison Williams goes one spot later.
No.
So JSN to me is a great value in redraft and best ball right now.
Okay, put it in the chat. I will bet anyone. You can put your contact information in the chat. I will bet anyone $1 million. $1 million. I'm putting $1 million. I have a checkbook right over there. I am good for it. I will write you $1 million check if Jamison Williams outscores Jackson Smith and Jigba in fantasy football PPR leagues this year. $1 million. Put it in the chat.
You'd have to have a lot of touchdowns, guys.
I thought that was the cut point right there. That was
beautiful. No. We're not. That wasn't the cut point. I didn't misread the cut point, did I?
I thought that the audience deserves a lot more content from us, Alan.
Yeah, no, I'm saying I thought that sounded like a wrap.
He's mailing it in.
That sounded like a wrap.
As soon as there's any kind of crescendo of phrasing, He's trying to wrap it up. He's trying to go home. He's looking over at the director. Can we go home now? Can I go back to my trailer?
Roy Brado in the chat wants this $1 million bet. Tyler Knable, take his information.
We're gonna get $1 million.
$1 million on your way.
$1 million.
He's putting up the whole company. The whole.
Yeah, I'm good for it. It's $1 million bet. Let's go.
It's Vegas style though, Roy. You've got to get the money to us. We're gonna hold it.
Yeah, you got to
escrow.
send me the money first, and I'll hold it in escrow.
Vegas style. We're basically
you
Caesar's
send me
Palace
the money.
right
I'll send you the address to send me the money, and I'll hold it in escrow.
Because if not, he's going double or nothing. The following year.
Jameson Williams joke.
Jamo's a good
joke
breakout.
No joke. Like Jameson's interesting, but we would say that the
over Jackson Smith and Jigba.
Oh yeah, no, I did.
Over a guy that's gonna be like getting fed slot snaps.
If you want to do that bet, not the million, but if you want to do like a $20 bet on that, like I would take it. Not that I like hardcore believe it, but I like Jameson Williams enough that if you want to go total fantasy points week through 1 through 17, you don't get off the hook for injuries. If you want to do $20, I'm happy to do that one in PPR.
I had Jameson Williams as one of my potential breakout wide receivers, but again, it's like and to Roy's argument in the chat, Roy's active. Shout out to the chat. If you're enjoying the show, press the like button. But Jameson Williams is sort of a cap target ceiling, to say the least. We're asking him to absorb Josh Reynolds' targets. And if he absorbs the entire Josh Reynolds targets, all of the Josh Reynolds usage, combined with what he did last year, that puts him at 105 targets. And I agree, if he hits 105 targets with his skill set, his explosiveness in that offense, that's something that's going to help us out in fantasy. But that's sort of somewhat wishful thinking. I think he could end up being like a 95 target guy with some manufactured touches as a runner,
rushing
explosive
yards,
big play guy. Yeah. So at the end of the day, like I like Jameson Williams, but it's just a usage argument. He has Amon-Ra St. Brown, who could finish as wide receiver 1 overall, Sam Laporta, who's the favorite to finish as tight end 1 overall, and Jahmyr Gibbs, who has an outside shot of being running back 1 overall. There's a lot of teammate competition and a lot of mouths to feed on a weekly basis. Oh. Jameson Williams can be a spike week guy. That's helpful. But JSN can be a guy who is a 140 targeted player. This year he could lead Seattle in targets. So I'm definitely JSN
Theo,
over Jameson Williams.
If you like JSN, who do you prefer to be the quarterback in Seattle? Do you want it to be Geno or do you want it to be Sam Howell?
I think Geno. I think Geno would be a guy that had a very strong season 2 years ago. He has familiarity with the skill position players, and I think Sam Howell being there, it's a very cagey move for Seattle because it gives them a QB2 that has started NFL games that can go in and probably be pretty similar to Geno. But I do think Geno's a better player, and I think Geno has a higher upside in this offense. Sam Howell is a little bit more of an insurance guy. But for what they gave up for Sam Howell, I thought it was a cagey move.
I mean, it's better than it's someone to push Geno, right? At least it's a guy who's
Sam Howell is better. Sam Howell is better than how many of the backups right now?
No, we need to cut this to the outtakes. I love that the way you said it somehow, and the way I was and wasn't paying attention, and I was multitasking. I thought you said that Sam Howell's an insurance guy, like that's what he looks like.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
like,
he would definitely.
He looks like a man that
Sam
sells. He does though.
Yeah.
He looks like a man that sells insurance. That's what right. He is, and yet he is one of the best. I mean, Washington. I mean, they just punted away on that guy, and that guy had a nice 6-week stretch.
Yeah, I mean, when you bring in Jaden Daniels and you have a credible. Mariota's their backup, so it's not really credible. But yeah, you don't want to have him just sitting.
Isn't he better than Mariota though?
Right,
no, guys. It was Mariota, but I think that Sam Howell was a cash out thing though.
Right.
Like you get the guy in the 6th round, you draft him in the 6th round, and you trade him, and you end up getting a 3rd rounder. Classic cash out.
They got a 3rd rounder for Sam Howell. Good for them, man. And
you don't need last year's starter around the rookie quarterback who's like the commanding voice in the locker room. I just think it's an organizational move. Get him out of there. Thanks, Sam Howell. Yeah, and also
right.
It was a benefit to Sam Howell.
Right. Hey, hold on. That's right. That's not what he was traded for. He was traded for a 4th round pick, and then they got back a 6. So a 2-round which is good.
I would have remembered
Fourth rounder.
Had it been a 3rd rounder, I would not have questioned it. But it is interesting. But that is the reason. Okay, thank you for illustrating the reason. They didn't cash out. What they did was they just wanted to clear the decks. You don't want the remnants of the last quarterback we were trying to interfere with what Jaden Daniels is going to be in his growth and development. You don't want Sam Howell hanging around like a fart. You don't. You want to clear the air, clear the old stale fart smell from Sam Howell the second half last year. Just turn the fan on, get him out of here, 4th rounder, whatever it takes. That is a great deal for Seattle. The bottom line is, what I'm saying is, he's a better backup than Mariota. If you're just going player by player down the roster, he's a better player than Mariota. And to get a player that put together a nice half a season as a rookie quarterback in the NFL, to get him for a 4th rounder, if you're Seattle and you're quarterback needy, that was a very savvy move. That may be. It's a great topic for the decision point. That's one of the better under the radar trades of the entire offseason.
Yeah, and it also pushes Geno a little bit. Doesn't give him a free pass if he's having a string of bad games.
And it's a benefit to Sam Howell. Sam Howell gets to move to a situation where a quarterback doesn't have a whole lot of insulation. There's a potential that if Geno struggles with the new coaching staff, Sam Howell will get a look this year. So, and he would never really get that with Jaden Daniels, who's going to be awesome in Washington this year.
This is what you want to do. If you're in a super flex league, a 2-quarterback league in terms of draft strategy, you want to be the guy that's getting 4 to 5 quarterbacks. That your 3rd quarterback is Michael Penix. Your 4th quarterback is Sam Howell. And suddenly you have 2 of the best backups in the league. That is such an under-discussed yet powerful super flex and 2 QB strategy, because if Geno gets benched and Sam Howell has suddenly that's a 1st-round pick. Suddenly you can flip him for a 1st-round pick. How many times have we seen this? We're insane. Like we have our head in our hands seeing these trades come in week 5 in Superflex, these desperate teams trading for a Sam Howell, a 1st-round pick, a future first. You know it happens. It happens every year. Sam Howell was traded for a 1st-round pick last year.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What about older wide receivers? There are some receivers that you draft just based on upside, hoping that they can recapture the magic or they have 1 more year left, but you go it eyes wide open. You're like, this is it. He was signed to a 1-year deal. Like, this may or may not happen. Keenan Allen.
Mike, right? Keenan Allen, Mike Evans,
Keenan Allen, you're not trading him to flip him. You're 100% trading him because you have a win now team, or you have a team that's win now and win later. But the way to get that win now aspect, if you drafted a bunch of young guys, would be to pile into a few Keenan Allens at the end. There are a handful of older receivers, though, that have some insulated value, that do have potential trade value, isn't there? If you had to pick one, who would it be?
Tyreek Hill. He's 30 years old.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, right,
guys, can I just for the future for the show, both of you, when I am posing a question to you like that, I'm not looking for top 10 talents in the league. Can I just explain? I don't want to hear Jahmyr Gibbs. I don't want to hear Tyreek Hill. When I ask a question like that, we're trying to move down the board. We spent the first 30 minutes of the show talking about 1st-round strategy.
It's an easy one. It's an easy one for a value wide receiver in startups right now. If you're looking to get an older wide receiver and sort of treat him as a mercenary that you can use this year, but if your season goes south, you could probably flip him.
Can I guess? It always Mike? It's always Mike Evans, right?
This one's
my guess. I thought it was Mike Evans too.
Yeah.
Well, so Mike Evans, we've actually seen him go up in dynasty valuation from last year. He took a step up where last year, Evans, you got a huge discount if you were looking at Mike Evans versus the Devontae Adams, the Diggs, that whole tier was going way above him.
But
Now
by the way,
Mike
I
Evans
just want to say before you give your answer, Diggs to me is terrifying because Diggs could get pushed down the depth chart by even players like John Mechie.
Well, no, I don't know about that.
There's so much depth there at the wide receiver position. They just signed Nico Collins. I'm a Nico Collins fader. And for that reason, I do like Diggs, but he's a little bit terrifying in that I'm not expecting anything. If the targets are not there in the first few weeks, I'm not expecting anything. I'm just drafting him because I want exposure to that offense. But who are you going to say, Theo?
Devontae Adams?
For me, no. It's Amari Cooper who goes 2 rounds behind those guys.
That's right.
So if you look at Amari Cooper goes 2 rounds behind Devontae Adams, 2 rounds behind Mike Evans, 2 rounds behind Debo, 2.5 rounds behind Stephon Diggs. And this is a guy where the scoring has been solid for Amari Cooper. If we compare Amari Cooper's scoring with DK Metcalf's scoring over the last 2 years, it's not even close. And it's a situation where the offense could be we expect the offense to be more aggressive this year. Now, whether it's going to be a better offense remains to be seen. But I think that with their coordinator hire going from Van Pelt to a fired and rehired Dorsey, I think that they're going to be more aggressive as an offense. I think Amari Cooper this year still has top 15 wide receiver potential. And I think that this is a guy where he's played well. He played very well with Flacco last year to end the year. If anybody plays best ball, your season was destroyed by Amari Cooper when he had the massive game. I believe that was week 15, Alan? Amari Cooper had the spike week. So Amari Cooper went nuclear in week 15 last year. We saw it. And now he's sort of back to being pushed aside in dynasty startups. He's sort of treated like a Keenan Allen. He's younger, though. Amari's 30. This is a player who has continually been treated as an elite weapon every team he goes on. And this is a guy where he's continuing to garner targets. And if you look at the teammate competition he has at the wide receiver spot, there's no reason that he shouldn't lead Cleveland in targets comfortably again this year. So if the offense takes a step forward and he still has this role, then Amari Cooper is going to give me a window to trade out of him, and I'm be able to draft him rounds behind these other guys. So Amari Cooper for me is a really, really strong value in dynasty startups. My answer would have been Mike Evans after last season when there was sort of the fear with him being a free agent. We didn't really have an idea, but the market's corrected itself on Evans. Evans is steamed up in every format. And dynasty right now, you're not getting a discount. Amari, you're getting discounts right now. He's cheap to trade for too.
Cooper was really good when Watson was healthy too. I think he was averaging 15 PPR points a game. So I like that call. And if you go early running back, these Bijans, Gibbs, they're in Dynasty. That's the cheat code, right? The older wide receivers. You can't get those guys. They're round 2 and 3 in redraft. In Superflex Dynasty, they're round 8. It's really is a nice way to play Dynasty in 2024 startups.
You want to go older Alabama wide receiver dichotomy with us? We have Amari Cooper 35 slots ahead of Calvin Ridley. For all the reasons we talked about, Calvin Ridley is in a very precarious situation with Will Levis and DeAndre Hopkins. If DeAndre Hopkins is Larry Fitzgerald, suddenly that situation does not look that good for Calvin Ridley. And it's possible that Calvin Ridley has never been that good, isn't that good, and just is disappointing. And his value is very tenuous, much more tenuous than Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper has both a higher ceiling and a higher floor than Calvin Ridley. And Amari Cooper isn't even, he's a few months older. But it's funny, you think, Amari Cooper's much older. No. They're almost the same age. And Amari Cooper is just much better. Much better. I like
Matt,
betting on that. Yeah, especially in formats that reward rushing quarterbacks. That is one of the best stacks in all formats. Watson Cooper.
We have a comment in the chat that I thought was interesting. Alan, why would you invest in a player that's 30 plus in a dynasty startup This is sort of a continually chasing upside even in the later rounds. I think it's a combination of
we get our youth. It's if you want to win.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, we'll get our youth equity early on.
Yes.
Like we're not advocating drafting old early, but when you get down into these double-digit rounds, the hit rates on these players goes down and down and down. And the young players being drafted in this range, the bust rates are higher. So it's like if I get to round 9 in a startup and I have multiple players with youth and potential to trade them, guys that can gain dynasty value, then I'm willing to dip into some of these older guys, and it creates this sort of window for me to win despite having a young roster. So just because we're a dynasty roster doesn't mean that every single player on your roster needs to be like 25 and under. I want to have those guys. I want to have the young players. Matt talked about the importance of age in dynasty earlier and the age apex and the cliffs, but having some of these guys that don't cost us anything, that we can get multiple starts this season, if not double-digit starts, with a guy like Amari Cooper to balance out your roster, that's perfectly fine.
Oh yeah, I'm getting more Cooper in Dynasty than I am redraft.
I think that's fair.
Oh yeah. Oh,
nobody wants
no
him.
Just look where the value pockets are. Absolutely. And so, check out the Dynasty rankings. You can see exactly where. It's funny. Go to Player Profiler, subscribe to the Dynasty Deluxe or the player rankings. You can see the Dynasty rankings, see where we have Calvin Ridley versus where we have Amari Cooper. And I wrote a book, The Dynasty Dominator, available on Amazon. And in it, it talks about handcuffing running backs in Dynasty, which you would never do in a seasonal league, strategy-wise. And my favorite handcuff for Dynasty is a running back I love for seasonal leagues this year, combined with a running back I absolutely love for Dynasty. And I like to draft them both. Right? So I can get the production, but I can also get the value insulation. Because the running back, and again, I'm not talking about Jahmyr Gibbs. I know Jahmyr Gibbs, guys. I know Jahmyr Gibbs and Breece Hall and Bijan Robinson have insulated value. We're not talking about that. We're going outside the top 25. Outside the top 25, Tajay Spears. Tajay Spears is a guy that he's like a tight end in that he's going to get all the benefit of the doubt because Tony Pollard's there. And so if he doesn't produce in the first few weeks, he's going to lose no value. He's still young. People appreciate his explosiveness and his electricity as a playmaker. Pollard Spears stacks is a savvy little dynasty tactic. So it's a little micro move that you can make. If you have Spears, get Pollard. If you have Pollard, get Spears. They even have similar ADPs.
I think that's an interesting one. Double tapping the running back position. With those guys, you're sort of like Pollard is cheaper than Spears, but if you want to go with a kind of a similar in terms of your approach, Matt, but the cost of the initial running back is higher, it would be a Trey Benson, who's sort of in fuego in dynasty startups. But on my Trey Benson teams, I can add James Conner for super cheap. And Conner at 29 years old, 29-year-old Conner, and he's looking like he's on the way out. He is very much a mercenary, and it could be a very short-term mercenary. But that's a double tap that you're able to make pretty easily in these dynasty startups right now.
I mean, yeah, as long as you're getting the one true star here, which is Trey Benson, Conner, he's an afterthought. Feel free, draft him. Do you have a particular handcuff for dynasty that you like, Alan?
No, I don't. I'm just kidding. I'm messing with you. I've been drafting a lot of Braylon Allen guys because Breece Hall, we've already seen him miss a good chunk, right? And you can't count Blake Corum because you don't want players that are high up on those rankings. So
you can't do Corum. Corum and Kyron Williams is not recommended.
Right. So,
not. If anyone's tempted to do that, do not do that. Do not do that. Just don't draft Kyron Williams and go all in on Blake Corum. That is my advice.
Yeah, Braylon Allen's continually available in the
like Roshan and Swift. No, thank you. Right? Swift's going too high. And Swift is a do not draft in Dynasty. right? The reason why it doesn't make sense with Swift, because Swift is not cheap like James Conner is, right? And Swift isn't. There's a chance that his value absolutely craters. There's a guy who is very fragile, because if the Bears choose not to use him, if he has a bad camp and he turns off the coaches with his lackluster attitude, and then and then all of a sudden you're like, why isn't he getting touches? Why are they giving Roschon goal line carries? In week 1, suddenly Swift is he's on his 3rd team. The Dynasty community as a collective realizes, oh wait, Swift has like 1 or 2 years left in the league. Gone. Value's gone. Like, I wouldn't do that. That's not a good use of draft capital in a startup or trade capital. Just bet on Roschon and be done with it. Another one that I like, though, is Zamir White and Lobby. That you're not paying a lot. You know Zamir White is going to be the established bell cow on an underrated offense. And Lobby, it's going to take him a year to get established as a satellite back.
I think it's interesting. I talked about Will Shipley earlier. Will Shipley, I think, is a really, really, really strong prospect. And I think that Shipley's one where he's still cheap enough to get in Dynasty. But I think that he would be the guy I would bet on over Gainwell in Philadelphia. And then for me, it's a Ray Davis. We talked about him a little bit. Ray Davis is a guy where Ray Davis is a like-for-like replacement for James Cook. Ray Davis is an older running back already. But one thing that's interesting with Ray Davis is James Cook's a guy that we like at Player Profiler, but he has struggled with fumbles at times. Ray Davis, you never know if they're just going to hand him a little bit more of a workload if that happens with Cook again. And then the last one who's cheaper than those two is Tyrone Tracy because of the athletic profile and because of the fact that it's Devin Singletary as the RB1 in New York. I think Eric Gray is something that Tracy needs to overcome, but Tracy's an interesting one. It's like an Antonio Gibson-like athletic profile on an offense that needs playmakers, Matt. There's not a lot of guys there besides Malik Neighbors that were like, this is a long-term asset.
Yeah, and the last sort of running back duo that I would consider is remember, this is something I really want to get into, remember what that Washington backfield looks like, right? You have Austin Eckler there, right? And then you also have Brian Robinson. And I've been doing a lot of thinking. Like I said, I was in Maine for a week, and I was thinking very deeply about Brian Robinson. And so here's why I think it makes so much sense to draft Brian Robinson. From the Podfather to you, I deeply appreciate you tuning in. And many ask, what can I do? What can I do to help support the hosts, the research they do, the production costs? Go to playerprofiler.com, Dynasty Deluxe, World Famous Draft Kit, Rankings, DFS Dominator, and of course, data analysis. Subscribe to any one of those, and you support all of us and take Player Profiler to the moon.